My name is Arthur Bennett, and I am 74 years old. I live in a small town outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the same house where I raised my children, buried my dreams, built my memories, and spent the best years of my marriage. The house is not fancy. It has old wooden floors that creak in the hallway. The kitchen cabinets are faded from years of use. The front porch needs paint, and the backyard fence leans a little to one side. But to me, that house is not just wood, brick, and glass. It is my life. It is where my wife, Margaret, and I brought our 3 children home from the hospital. It is where birthdays were celebrated, Christmas mornings were filled with laughter, and Thanksgiving dinners lasted until late at night. It is where my children learned to walk. It is where Margaret and I grew old together, and it is where everything almost fell apart. For most of my life, I believed family was the one thing a man could always trust. I worked 42 years at a steel parts factory. I was never rich, but I was steady. I woke up before sunrise, packed my lunch in the same metal lunchbox, kissed my wife goodbye, and worked until my hands ached. Margaret stayed home when the children were young, then later worked part-time at a school cafeteria. She was gentle, patient, and stronger than anyone knew. Together we raised 3 children. Our oldest son, Daniel, was smart and confident. He became a real estate agent and always talked about investments, property values, and money. Our daughter, Kelly, was emotional and sharp-tongued, but I loved her deeply. She married a man from Ohio and had 2 children of her own. Our youngest son, Mark, was the one who struggled most. He changed jobs often, borrowed money more than once, and always promised he would get his life together. Margaret and I helped all of them. When Daniel needed money for his first car, I gave it to him. When Kelly and her husband were short on their down payment, we helped them. When Mark lost his job and fell behind on rent, I paid what he owed. I never kept count. Parents do not keep score. At least good parents do not. But as I got older, I slowly learned something painful. Sometimes children keep score differently. They remember what they think they deserve, but they forget what you already gave. Everything changed when Margaret got sick. At first, it was small things. She forgot where she placed her glasses. She would leave the stove on. Sometimes she asked me the same question 3 times in one morning. The doctor said it was early dementia. I remember sitting in that office holding her hand while she stared at the floor. She did not cry. Margaret rarely cried in front of people. But that night, after we came home, she stood in the kitchen and whispered, "Arthur, I'm scared." I held her close and said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. For the next year, I became her caretaker. I cooked breakfast. I helped with her medicine. I drove her to appointments. I labeled drawers and cabinets so she could find things more easily. Some days were hard. Some days she was confused. Some days she got angry because she knew her mind was changing, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But she was still my wife. She was still Margaret, and I wanted her final years to be peaceful. That was when my children began to change. At first they acted concerned. Daniel called and said, "Dad, you need to think about long-term planning." Kelly said, "Mum needs proper care." Mark said, "You shouldn't be handling this alone." I thought they were worried about us. I thought they wanted to help. Then Daniel came to the house one Saturday afternoon, carrying a folder. He sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Margaret had served him pancakes, as a boy, and spread papers in front of me. "Dad," he said, "I checked the value of the house." I looked at him confused. "Why?" He tapped one of the papers. "This place is worth a lot more than you think. The market is strong right now. If you sell, you and Mum could move into assisted living, and the money could be managed properly." I stared at him. Managed properly by who? Daniel avoided my eyes. By the family. There it was. Not by me, not by Margaret. By the family, which meant by him. I closed the folder slowly. Your mother wants to stay in her home? Daniel sighed, like I was being difficult. Dad, Mom is not in a position to make these decisions anymore. His words hit me hard. Margaret was in the next room, sitting in her chair by the window. She could still hear. She could still feel. She could still understand more than people gave her credit for. I lowered my voice. Do not talk about your mother like she is already gone. Daniel leaned back. I'm just being realistic. No, I said. You're being cold. He left angry that day. I hoped it was just stress. I hoped he would think about what he said and apologize. Instead, he called Kelly. Then Kelly called me. Dad, she said, Daniel told me you refused to listen. I refused to sell our home. You're being emotional. Of course I'm emotional. This is my wife. This is our life. Kelly became quiet for a moment, then said something I never expected from my own daughter. Dad, you're not thinking about what's fair to everyone. Fair to everyone. I almost laughed, but my chest hurt too much. What does that mean, Kelly? She hesitated. It means the house is part of the family's future. No, I said. This house is part of your mother's present. She did not like that. Over the next few weeks, the calls became worse. Daniel said I was being stubborn. Kelly said I was letting guilt control me. Mark said selling the house would make things easier. For everybody. Everybody. That word told me everything. They were not thinking about Margaret. They were not thinking about me. They were thinking about what would be left. One evening, I found Margaret crying in our bedroom. She was holding an old family photo from Christmas 20 years earlier. All 3 children were standing around us, smiling. They want the house, don't they? She asked. I sat beside her. They think selling it is best. She shook her head slowly. No, Arthur. They want the money. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I could not lie to her. The family meeting happened 2 weeks later. Daniel arranged it without asking me. He said all 3 children were coming over because things needed to be discussed. That Saturday, they arrived at 2 o'clock. No grandchildren, no food, no warmth. They came like business partners arriving for a negotiation. Margaret sat beside me on the sofa. I held her hand. Daniel stood near the fireplace. Kelly sat across from us, arms folded. Mark leaned against the wall, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Daniel began. Dad, we all agree that it's time to make changes. I looked at my children. What changes? You and Mom need to sell the house. The room went still. Margaret's hand tightened around mine. I said, no. Kelly immediately leaned forward. Dad, please don't start like that. I said no. Daniel's jaw tightened. You haven't even listened. I have listened for weeks. You want us to sell our home, move somewhere we don't want to go, and let you control the money. That's not fair, Daniel snapped. What isn't fair, I said, is treating your mother like an obstacle. Mark finally spoke. Dad, nobody is treating Mom like that. But she needs care. You're old too. What happens if you fall? What happens if medical bills pile up? Then I'll handle it. Kelly shook her head. You always say that. You always act like you can handle everything. Because for 40 years, I did. That silenced her for a second. Then Daniel said the words that changed everything. If you don't cooperate, we may have to look into legal options. Margaret gasped. I stared at my oldest son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I stayed up with when he had a fever. The boy I helped through college. Now he was standing in my living room threatening me. "Legal options?" I repeated. Daniel looked away. "If you're not making responsible decisions, someone may need to step in." I slowly stood up. My knees hurt. My back was stiff. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was calm. "You came into my house to threaten me?" Kelly started crying, but I could tell they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration. "Dad, you're twisting everything," she said. "No," I replied. "For the first time I'm seeing everything clearly." Mark muttered, "You're making this harder than it has to be." I turned to him. "Hard for who, Mark? Hard for your sick mother? Or hard for 3 grown children who are already counting money that does not belong to them?" Nobody answered. That answer was enough. I walked to the front door and opened it. "Leave." Daniel stared at me. "Dad!" "Leave my house." Kelly cried harder. Mark shook his head. Daniel picked up his folder. And one by one, my children walked out. When the door closed, Margaret broke down. I held her as she cried into my chest. That was the day my children turned against us. And that was the day I knew I had to stand strong. The next morning I called an attorney. His name was Mr. Coleman, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. I told him everything: the pressure, the threats, the talk about selling the house, the way my children were trying to make decisions for us. He listened carefully. Then he said, "Mr. Bennett, loving your children does not mean giving them control over your life." Those words stayed with me. Over the next month, I made changes. I updated our wills. I secured our bank account. For instance, I changed passwords. I gave medical authority to a trusted cousin of Margaret's, not my children. I made sure the house could not be sold unless I chose to sell it. I also placed important documents in a safe deposit box. When Daniel found out, he was furious. He called me and said, "So you're shutting your own children out?" I said, "No, I'm shutting greed out." He hung up. Kelly sent a long message saying I had broken the family. Mark stopped speaking to me completely. For months, the silence was painful. I would sit in the kitchen drinking coffee, looking at the empty chairs around the table. I missed my children. I missed the family we used to be. But every time I wondered if I had been too harsh, Margaret would reach for my hand and say, "Thank you for protecting us." That gave me strength. Her illness slowly got worse. Some days she forgot what year it was. Some days she thought the children were still little and asked if they had finished their homework. But she never forgot the house. She knew the bedroom curtains she had chosen. She knew the maple tree in the backyard. She knew the sound of the old front door. And she knew me. Every night before bed she would say, "Arthur, are we staying here?" And every night I answered, "Yes, sweetheart, we're staying home." That promise became my purpose. The children did not visit much after that. Daniel came once, but only to argue again. He said I was making bad financial choices. Kelly came around Christmas, but the visit was cold. She barely looked at her mother. Mark called twice, asking for money, but when I refused, he disappeared again. I cried more in that period than I had in my whole life. Not in front of Margaret. Never in front of her. But sometimes, after she fell asleep, I went to the garage, sat in my old work chair, and let the tears come. It is a strange kind of pain when your children are alive, but feel lost to you. A parent can survive many things: hard work, illness, loneliness. But being treated like a bank account by your own children cuts into a place no doctor can reach. The following spring, Margaret's condition became serious. Hospice care began coming to the house. The nurse told me it might not be long. I called all 3 children. Daniel said he was busy but would try to come. Kelly cried and said she needed time. Mark did not answer. In the end, only Kelly arrived before Margaret passed. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom, looking at her mother lying under the quilt she had made years earlier. For the first time in months, Kelly looked like my little girl again. She whispered, "Mum?" Margaret opened her eyes. It took her a moment, but then she smiled faintly. "Kelly," she said. Kelly fell to her knees beside the bed and cried, "I'm sorry, Mum." Margaret lifted a weak hand and touched her hair. A few hours later, my wife passed away peacefully in her own bed. Her final words to me were, "You kept me home." I kissed her forehead and said, "I promised." After the funeral, the children came back to the house. This time they brought casseroles, flowers, and quiet voices. But grief does not erase truth. I knew the conversation was coming. It happened 2 days after the burial. Daniel stayed behind after everyone left. Kelly sat at the kitchen table. Mark stood near the sink. Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad, we need to talk about what happens now." I looked at him. "Your mother has been gone 2 days." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to be insensitive." But he was. He opened his mouth to continue, but I raised my hand. "No." He frowned. "No what?" "No, we are not discussing the house. No, we are not discussing money. No, you are not going to stand in this kitchen 2 days after your mother's funeral and talk about inheritance." Kelly looked down. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's face hardened. "You can't avoid this forever." "I'm not avoiding anything," I said. "I already handled it." That got their attention. "What does that mean?" Mark asked. "It means my affairs are in order. The house is mine. My money is mine. And while I am alive, nobody will pressure me into giving up either." Daniel stared at me like he did not recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe none of them did. For years they had known me as the father who gave, the father who helped, the father who said yes. But that man had limits too. Kelly began to cry softly. "Dad, we didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at her with tired eyes. "Yes, you did. Maybe not at first. Maybe you convinced yourselves you were being practical. But somewhere along the way you stopped seeing your mother as a person. You stopped seeing me as your father. You saw the house. You saw the money. You saw what you might get." No one spoke. Then Mark said quietly, "I'm sorry." I believed he meant it, but sorry cannot undo everything. Daniel stood up. "So what now? You just cut us off?" I shook my head. "No. I still love you. I will always love you. But love does not mean access. Love does not mean control. Love does not mean you get to frighten an old man in his own home." Daniel looked away. That was the first time I saw shame on his face. Months passed. The house became very quiet without Margaret. Some mornings, I still made 2 cups of coffee by mistake. Sometimes I heard a sound and thought she was calling me. Grief is not one big storm. It is small waves that hit you when you least expect it. But even in that loneliness, I felt peace. Because I had kept my promise. I had stood strong when it mattered. Kelly began visiting again. At first it was awkward. She would bring groceries or sit with me on the porch. We did not talk much about the past. Then one afternoon she said, "Dad, I was wrong." I looked at her. She wiped her eyes. "I thought I was helping, but I think I was scared. Scared of Mum getting worse. Scared of losing control. And yes, scared there would be nothing left." That honesty hurt, but it also opened a door. I said, Fear can explain what you did. It cannot excuse it. She nodded. I know. Mark came around too. He still struggled, but he stopped asking for money. Instead, he helped repair the fence and cleaned out the gutters. Daniel was the last. For almost a year, we barely spoke. Then, one Sunday evening, he came to the house alone. He looked older than before, less proud. He stood on the porch and said, "Can I come in?" I let him. He sat at the kitchen table and looked around. "I forgot how much of Mum is in this house," he said quietly. I waited. His eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong, Dad." Those 4 words were not enough to heal everything, but they were a beginning. Daniel admitted he had looked at the house like a financial asset. He said his work in real estate had made him think in numbers instead of memories. He said he convinced himself he was protecting us, but deep down he knew he also wanted control. I listened. Then I said, "You hurt your mother." He cried then. A grown man, my oldest son, crying at the same table where he had once threatened me. "I know," he whispered. I did not forgive him that day completely. Forgiveness is not a light switch. But I let him come back the next week, and the week after that. Slowly, we became a family again. Not the same family as before. That family was gone, but maybe a more honest one. My children learned that I was old, but I was not helpless. They learned that love does not give them the right to control me. And I learned something too. I learned that standing strong does not mean you stop loving people. It means you stop letting love be used against you. Today I still live in the house. The porch has been repainted. Mark fixed the fence. Kelly planted flowers near the walkway. Daniel helped repair the old garage door without charging me a dime. Sometimes we still have dinner together. Sometimes the grandchildren come and run through the hallway like their parents once did. When they laugh, the house feels alive again.